Looking back on the years I spent in that weathered white house on Willow Lane in Hawthorne, America, it feels like the story of someone else's life. But it was mine. Every soft morning light across the kitchen table, every late-night echo of children's laughter in the hallway, and every hushed conversation in the living room belonged to me. If I close my eyes, I can still picture the peeling paint on the window frames and the neat rows of marigolds I stubbornly planted each spring, a hopeful act against the odds, much like the way I raised Emily and Luke after their father died. David's passing was sudden and cruel in its finality. One moment he was there, brewing his favorite French roast and humming along with an old Simon and Garfunkel record. The next moment, he was gone, the victim of a heart attack on a brisk November morning. I was left alone in that house with 2 children and a stack of medical bills that felt as tall as I was. People say time heals, but for a long time, all time did was expand the quiet. At night when the children were sleeping, I would wander through each room just to hear the echo of my footsteps. I was determined from the very first day not to let my children feel the weight of our new reality. I wanted Emily and Luke to remember their childhood for the warmth in the kitchen, not the cold absence in the master bedroom. I took a full-time job at Hawthorne Savings and Loan, a squat red brick building on Main Street, the kind with potted geraniums by the door and the smell of fresh paper always hanging in the air. On weekends, I worked at the local diner, pouring coffee for truckers and high school sweethearts, collecting tips that I sorted carefully into jars at home labeled groceries, school clothes, and sometimes Christmas. Every dollar felt like a victory, every penny a small act of defiance against the circumstances we'd been handed. I learned to budget with the precision of a scientist, stretching pounds when international clients came through and adding up dollars late into the night to make sure bills were paid, shoes replaced, and birthday cakes purchased, even if they were the store-bought kind with too sweet icing. The house itself became a symbol of our resilience. Willow Lane was lined with maples that turned the street into a river of gold every fall, and our house, with its sagging porch swing and creaky shutters, was known to every child in the neighborhood. I made it a point to keep the front yard tidy, the flower beds bursting with color. Inside, it was less about matching furniture and more about the memories made. Emily and Luke building blanket forts in the living room, David's books stacked on every available surface, the smell of apple pie in the oven. Evenings were sacred. After dinner, we'd gather in the living room, me with my tea, Emily sprawled across the rug with a novel, and Luke building towers from old Lego sets. Sometimes I'd read to them, the 3 of us cocooned in the soft lamplight, the outside world held at bay for just a little while. I told myself, over and over, that as long as we had each other, we could weather any storm. Still, there were nights when the loneliness settled in like a thick fog. I'd lie awake, listening to the old house creak and shift, and worry about everything: bills, broken appliances, the relentless march of time. I worried that Emily, with her sharp mind and boundless energy, would outgrow Hawthorne and leave me behind. I worried that Luke, quieter and more sensitive, would feel lost without his father's steady hand. But most of all, I worried that the sacrifices I made, working late, saying no to new clothes, skipping holidays, would one day become invisible to them, just part of the backdrop of their lives. Time, of course, moved forward whether I wanted it to or not. Emily grew tall and willowy with her father's hazel eyes and my stubborn chin. She threw herself into school, collecting trophies and honors, always with an eye on the future. She talked about cities I'd only seen in movies, Boston, New York, Chicago, and dreamed of a life filled with art, music, and possibility. Luke took longer to find his place. He loved working with his hands, spending hours in the garage fixing old bikes and tinkering with radios. He was loyal, gentle, and slow to trust, but he loved deeply, just like David had. I did my best to encourage them both, even when their dreams felt impossibly far away. When Emily was accepted to a prestigious college in Boston, I cried tears, of pride and terror in equal measure. The tuition was astronomical, but I found a way, refinancing the house, taking on a 3rd job cleaning offices at night, pinching every dollar until it squeaked. I sent Emily off with a brand new suitcase and a heart so full it ached. Luke, meanwhile, stayed closer to home, attending the local community college and eventually landing a job with a small tech startup in Columbus, Ohio. He called every Sunday, sometimes just to talk about nothing at all. I treasured those conversations, his voice a lifeline to the boy he'd been and the man he was becoming. Throughout those years, the house remained my refuge. It held the ghosts of laughter and the shadows of loss, but it was also the place where I learned what it meant to be strong. There were holidays spent around the dining room table, just the three of us, but always enough love to fill the space. I kept David's favorite chair in the corner, draped with one of his old sweaters, a small tribute to the life we'd built together. The neighborhood of Hawthorne was close-knit in a way that's rare these days. Neighbors brought casseroles. After David's funeral, left flowers on the porch when Emily graduated, and waved from their porches as Luke mowed lawns to earn extra cash. Mrs. Jenkins from next door would come by on Sunday mornings with homemade cinnamon rolls, never asking for anything in return. Mr. Lawson, the retired police officer, fixed our leaky roof one summer and refused to take a dime. Their kindness made the burdens a little lighter, the good days a little brighter. I became known at the bank as the one who never made mistakes, who always stayed late, and who remembered every client's name and story. When Mrs. Harper became branch manager, she promoted me to head teller and trusted me with the keys to the safe. The bank became my second home, orderly, predictable, and a place where my efforts mattered. Still, I never let my guard down. Every dollar I counted felt personal, a reminder of the thin line between security and scarcity. One summer, after years of careful saving, I surprised Emily and Luke with a trip to Washington, D.C. We took the train, splurged on a cheap hotel, and spent 3 days seeing the monuments, eating ice cream, and making memories. It wasn't Europe, like Emily had dreamed of, but it was ours. I watched my children gaze up at the Lincoln Memorial and felt for the first time in a long time that maybe we would be all right. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were fights over curfews, grades, and money. There were tears and slammed doors, moments when I wondered if I was doing anything right at all. But even in our hardest times, I knew I would never give up on my children. They were my reason for everything. As the years passed, the house changed too. The marigolds were replaced by roses, and the living room furniture rearranged a dozen times. I painted Emily's old bedroom pale blue after she moved out, turning it into a small study filled with my favorite books. Luke's trophies lined the hallway, a quiet reminder of the years when the house rang with his laughter. It was in this house, after so many years of sacrifice and struggle, that I learned the true meaning of love. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet, steadfast kind that holds you together through grief, worry, and joy. I thought, for the longest time, that my purpose was to give everything I had to my children, even when it cost me sleep, comfort, and at times my happiness. So when Emily called one chilly February evening to announce her engagement, I felt an overwhelming mix of pride and relief. She had found someone who loved her, someone she wanted to build a life with. She wanted a beautiful wedding in Boston, and as always, I promised to help in any way I could. I offered not only my love and support, but also the savings I'd scraped together over the years, eager to give her the celebration she deserved. Little did I know, as I stood on the front porch of the quiet house on Willow Lane, watching the sunset cast long shadows across the lawn, that my devotion would soon be tested in ways I never could have imagined. But that's the thing about love and motherhood. Just when you think you've given everything, life finds a way to ask for more. It's strange how, after years of big moments, graduations, birthdays, even the death of a spouse, one quiet morning can change your life more than any of them. The Thursday in May when I received Emily's email began like any other. I woke early, as I always do, and padded through the still house, hearing the soft creaks of the floorboards beneath my slippers. The air was crisp, the world outside already stirring with the faint rumble of garbage trucks and the distant barking of dogs. My kitchen, my little sanctuary, was bright with morning sun, casting patterns through the lace curtains I'd hung myself so long ago. I brewed a cup of coffee, weak, the way David used to like it, a habit I'd never quite broken, and sat at the table. There, in that small cluttered kitchen, surrounded by reminders of decades past, a chipped mug from my trip to New York, Emily's fourth-grade drawing of a cat taped beside the refrigerator, a faded snapshot of Luke and me at the Hawthorne Fall Festival. I felt almost content. My phone buzzed on the table. I didn't think anything of it at first. Mornings were when Emily often sent little messages, updates on wedding planning, pictures of fabric swatches, questions about flowers. I smiled before I even picked it up, expecting a request for advice or maybe a sweet, rushed "love you, Mom." Instead, there was just a single new email, her name in bold at the top. The subject line was short, about the wedding. For some reason, my stomach tightened. Maybe it was Mother's intuition, maybe just years of learning to expect a surprise at every turn. But I hesitated before opening it. When I finally clicked, her words jumped out, cold and abrupt, so different from the excited, sometimes anxious, messages she'd been sending for months. "Mom," she wrote, "I'm sorry, but I think it's best if you don't come to the wedding. There's a live stream link. You can watch from home. I know you already helped with the venue deposit, so just know we're grateful. Love, Emily." That was it. 4 sentences. No explanation, no warmth. The word grateful seemed to burn itself into my mind, echoing with an emptiness that felt sharper than anger. I read her email 3 times, thinking maybe I'd missed something. A hidden note of affection, a reason, anything to make it make sense. But there was nothing except that strange, impersonal grateful. Grateful for the money, perhaps, but not for me. For a long minute, I sat still. My coffee went cold, untouched, as I stared at the screen. My hands started to shake. A flood of images rushed through my mind. The vision I'd held for months of hugging Emily before she walked down the aisle, the photo I'd hoped someone would take of mother and daughter arm in arm, the laughter I'd imagined at the family dinner the night before the big day. In every vision, I was present. Now I realized all of that had been erased in a moment. I wasn't wanted. Not really. My first instinct was to call her. I reached for the phone, then pulled my hand away. What would I say? What would she say? Would she tell me it was a mistake, or would she double down, as she often did when challenged? I thought of all the times over the years when I'd swallowed my disappointment, chosen to smooth things over for the sake of peace, to be the mother who kept things running even when her own heart was breaking. I could already hear my voice, soft and measured, saying, "Of course, sweetheart, if that's what you need." But something inside me felt different this time. A fatigue, yes, but also a clarity. I'd spent my life choosing their comfort over my own. I didn't want to do it again. So I didn't call. I closed the laptop, stood up, and washed my cup. The house was quiet, almost painfully so. The clock ticked in the hallway. I ran my hands along the edge of the kitchen counter, grounding myself in the familiar, and let the silence fill the space that her words had left behind. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I sat down at my desk, logged into my online banking, and canceled the wire transfer for $8,000, the final payment for the caterers that I'd promised Emily just 2 weeks earlier. It was a significant amount, money I'd saved over years of late shifts and careful budgeting, money that was supposed to buy her a perfect day. I paused before I clicked cancel, thinking of all the arguments she might make, all the reasons I should send it anyway, but my finger did not hesitate. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I chose my boundary. It wasn't anger that guided me, but a deep, quiet exhaustion. A sense that I'd been asked for more than I had to give, not in money, but in spirit. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted, finally, to be seen as more than a checkbook or a convenient support system. I wanted to be missed, not for what I could provide, but for who I was, her mother, a person with feelings and limits. The fallout was immediate. My phone began to buzz within hours. The first call was from Luke. I let it go to voicemail, my hand trembling as I watched his name flash on the screen. I could picture him pacing his small apartment, running a hand through his hair, trying to find the right words. His first message was tentative. "Hey, Mom, I got a weird text from Emily. Is everything okay? Are you still, helping with the wedding?" His voice was anxious, but also hopeful, as if he wanted me to tell him everything was fine, to fix it the way I always did. I didn't call him back right away. I wasn't ready for the questions, the gentle but insistent pressure I knew would come. I needed to sit with my own decision, to let it settle into my bones. I spent the evening alone in the living room, the TV off, the only light coming from the lamp beside David's chair. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it was honest. Emily's messages started late that night, short at first, then more frantic. "Mom? What's going on? Did you get my email?" Then, "I need you to send the catering money tonight. The wedding is in 2 weeks." And finally, "Please, Mom, I can't do this without you." I stared at her words, feeling the familiar tug of obligation and guilt. I remembered every late night she'd crawled into my bed as a little girl, every fever I'd nursed her through, every time I'd dropped everything to help her through heartbreak or disappointment. But this was different. She wasn't a child anymore, and I wasn't just a resource to be drawn from. For the first time, I let the phone ring. I did not answer. I did not rush in to make things better. I sat in the quiet and let the reality of her absence, the absence of her kindness, her understanding, settle in. I thought of how quickly gratitude could be used as a mask for entitlement, and how many times I had let my children treat me as the safety net that was always there, no matter how carelessly they landed. That night, I slept badly. My dreams were a jumble of images: Emily's face as a child, the wedding dress she'd sent me a picture of, the bank statements lined up in neat rows on my desk. I woke up before dawn, feeling raw but also strangely lighter, as if the air in the house had changed somehow. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the sky turn from gray to gold, and realized that for once I was not dreading the day. The following morning, I went through my routines, moving more slowly than usual. At the bank, I must have seemed distracted. Mrs. Harper, my boss, gave me a gentle look as I counted cash at my station. "Everything all right, Margaret?" she asked. I forced a smile and nodded, but she saw through it. After lunch, she came, by my desk with a cup of tea and a lemon tart from the bakery down the street. "Take it easy today. You don't have to carry everything alone." Her kindness almost broke me. I'd grown so used to being the giver that I hardly knew how to accept even the smallest gesture. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Every time my phone buzzed in my purse, my heart lurched. Each message was another plea, another reminder of the rift that had opened between me and my daughter. Luke texted again that night, his tone more urgent, almost panicked. "Mom, Emily says you aren't helping with the wedding anymore. What's going on? Are you okay? Please call me." I stared at his words, torn between the impulse to reassure and the desire to hold my ground. By the third day, I began to feel the first stirrings of peace. The world outside kept moving. People came and went at the bank, neighbors mowed their lawns, and the mailman waved from the sidewalk. My life, it seemed, did not depend entirely on my children's approval. I had friends, routines, small joys that were mine alone. I started to remember the Margaret I'd been before motherhood had become my whole identity. Still, the pain lingered. I found myself replaying Emily's email in my mind, searching for a different ending. I wondered if I'd failed her, or if perhaps I'd failed myself by not setting boundaries sooner. In my heart, I hoped she would understand one day. I hoped she would realize that love was not something to be demanded or withdrawn, based on convenience. For now, though, I let the silence remain. I did not reach out. I did not apologize. For once, I allowed myself the quiet. If I ever imagined the moment I would finally stand up for myself, I thought it would be grand. Maybe something out of a movie, filled with dramatic music and decisive words that cut through years of self-sacrifice. In reality, it came quietly, wrapped in the ordinary rhythms of my days at the bank and the sanctuary of my own home, after a lifetime of bending and yielding, always putting others first. I had always thought of myself as strong, but the strength I found in those days was a different kind. It was the strength to stay silent, to let discomfort settle, to trust that I could hold my boundaries even as others pushed against them. At Hawthorne Savings and Loan, life continued around me with the relentless predictability I had always loved. The clack of keyboards, the buzz of the door as regular customers came and went, the faint smell of coffee drifting from the break room, these things grounded me. I needed them more than ever. But I was not the same as I'd been only a week, before. My colleagues, who had long seen me as reliable, unshakable Margaret, must have noticed the difference. I found myself lost in thought at my desk, my hands moving mechanically over stacks of bills, my mind replaying the scenes of the past few days like a film I could not turn off. It was Mrs. Harper who first said something. She had always had a gentle way about her, never intrusive, but always alert to the undercurrents of feeling in the bank. That morning, she lingered by my desk after our staff meeting, her eyes kind, but searching. "You seem tired, Margaret," she said softly. "Why don't you take a longer lunch today? Get some fresh air." I nodded, grateful for her concern. I took my lunch outside to a little park behind the bank, where children played on the swings and old men argued about baseball. I sat on a bench, my sandwich untouched, and let the sun warm my face. I thought about how strange it felt to not be rushing, not to be solving someone else's problems, just sitting in the quiet, breathing. When I returned to my desk, I found a mug of tea and a small lemon tart waiting for me, left without a note but unmistakably from Mrs. Harper. That simple act of kindness, offered freely with no strings attached, brought tears to my eyes. I sat there for a long moment, letting myself feel the care I had so often given but rarely received. "You don't have to do everything for everyone," she had said as she walked by, barely above a whisper. For the first time, I believed her, or at least I wanted to. That evening, as dusk settled over Willow Lane, I thought I'd finally found a measure of calm. I put on a pot of soup, watered the marigolds out front, and tried to lose myself in a book. But peace was not so easily won. Around 7, just as the sky was going gold, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I peered through the curtains and saw Luke stepping out, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. My heart jumped, torn between love and dread. I opened the door before he could knock. "Luke," I said, my voice steady. "Hey, Mom." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Can I come in?" We sat in the living room, the space feeling suddenly too small. For a few minutes, we talked around the real subject, his job, the new apartment, the weather. But I could feel the tension building, and at last he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and looked at me. "Emily called," he said, as if I didn't already know. She's really upset, Mom. She says you canceled the money for the wedding. Is that true?" I nodded, keeping my hands folded in my lap. "It's true," I said. "I told her I couldn't send the rest." He looked at me, searching for a sign that I might change my mind. "Why, Mom? You always said you'd help. She's counting on you." I felt a familiar pang, the old ache of wanting to make everything better, to rescue my children from disappointment. But underneath it was something new, a resolve I had never trusted before. "Luke, I have spent my whole life helping. I've given everything I have to you and your sister, and I would do it again. But I cannot keep giving when I am not respected, when my presence isn't valued, only my money." He looked confused, hurt. "It's just stress, Mom. She's not herself right now." I shook my head. "That's not an excuse. I was uninvited from her wedding by email, not even a call. And then, as if nothing had happened, I was expected to send money. No questions asked. I'm tired, Luke. I need to believe that I matter, even when I'm not the one fixing everything." He was silent for a long moment. I could see the struggle on his face, his loyalty to his sister, his reliance on my support, the way I'd always been the safety net. "Mom, you've always been the strong one. You always know what to do." I smiled sadly. "Maybe it's time you all learn that I'm more than what I do for you. I'm a person too." He stood up, pacing the room, frustration showing in the lines of his shoulders. "What about the wedding? They need that money. You're going to ruin it for her." "I'm not ruining anything," I said quietly. "I offered to be there, to celebrate with her, to give what I could. She made her choice. Now I am making mine." Luke slumped back down, defeated. He looked younger than he had in years, lost. "So that's it? You're just done?" "No, Luke, I'm not done loving." You. But I am done letting myself be used. You and your sister are adults. It's time you start treating me like a person, not a resource. He looked at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. He nodded, unable to speak, and after a moment, he left. I watched him go, my tears coming, but I did not waver. The next day at the bank was a blur. My hands moved over the money with practiced skill, but my mind wandered. I checked my phone at every break. Emily's messages were coming faster now, growing in desperation. Please, Mom, we can't do this without you. Why are you doing this to me? There was no apology, no real attempt to understand, only a frantic scramble to restore the support she had always assumed would be there. I stared at her words, feeling the pull of old habits, the urge to fix, to soothe, to give in. But I stayed silent. For the first time in my life, I realized that silence could be a boundary, not a punishment. My absence was a statement, a quiet, but powerful refusal to be treated as an afterthought. That afternoon, as I was heading home, my phone rang again. I didn't answer. I let the message sit, unread, as I drove through the familiar streets of Hawthorne, past the playground where Emily and Luke had played, past the school where I had volunteered for every bake sale, past the church where David and I had said our vows. The world went on, indifferent to my turmoil, and I let myself feel the ache, the emptiness, and then, slowly, a sense of peace. The real test came 2 days before the wedding. I was preparing a casserole in the kitchen, hands deep in flour, when the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands and opened the door to find Sophia, Emily's best friend, standing on the porch. Her eyes were wide, her face tight with worry. "Hi, Mrs. Bennet," she said, using my married name the way she always had. "Sophia." "Come in," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. She hesitated, then stepped inside. "I hope it's okay. Emily..." "She's not handling this well. She asked me to talk to you." I nodded, gesturing toward the living room. We sat, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Sophia fidgeted with her bracelet. "She's under so much pressure," she said, finally. "The guest list got out of control, her fiancé's family is driving her crazy, and then you not coming, and the money. She just doesn't know what to do." I listened, feeling the familiar tug of guilt. Sophia looked at me, her eyes pleading. "She needs you, Mrs. Bennet. Even if she can't say it. Please, can't you just send the money? Just this once?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words with care. "Sophia, I love Emily. I always will. But words are easy. Anyone can say, 'I love you' or 'I need you' when things are hard. What matters is how you treat people when you think you don't need them, when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable." I shook my head gently. "I can't keep teaching Emily that my love means giving up my dignity." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennet. I didn't realize—" "It's not your fault," I said softly. "You're a good friend for trying to help her. But this isn't something you can fix. It's something she has to learn." She nodded, looking chastened and sad. She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Thank you for listening." "Of course, Sophia," I said, rising to walk her to the door. When she left, I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, feeling a strange, unfamiliar peace. I looked around my quiet house, the marigolds glowing in the twilight, David's old sweater draped over the armchair, the casserole cooling on the stove, and realized that, for the first time in years, I had chosen myself. My heart hurt, but it was not the sharp pain of old. It was the ache of healing, of growing. I stood in the quiet and let it fill me, not with regret, but with relief. I understood, finally, that I did not need to earn my place in the world by sacrificing for everyone else. I could stand my ground, even when it hurt. And maybe, just maybe, that was what love, real love, was supposed to look like all along. The day of Emily's wedding arrived with an unceremonious quiet that felt both strange and strangely fitting. I woke up before dawn, as I always did, and for a moment I simply sat in bed, letting the silence of my room press in on me. The house felt lighter that morning, as if it too was relieved to finally reach this moment, to finally have an answer, even if it wasn't the answer I once longed for. There was no frantic packing, no ironing of a special dress, no rush to the airport or hotel. There was just the ordinary hum of a Saturday on Willow Lane, the far-off sound of a lawnmower, the robins calling to one another in the elm trees, and the soft warmth of early summer drifting in through my open window. I moved through my morning routine with an odd sense of calm. I made myself a simple breakfast, toast with jam and a pot of tea, and sat at the kitchen table, the sun painting golden patches across the old wood. I thought about the wedding, about Emily, about the park in Boston where she would stand in her dress, about the guests who would watch from folding chairs or behind their phone screens, about the dreams that had been revised and reduced, all because I had finally chosen to draw a line. For a moment, guilt flickered in my chest, and I wondered if I'd made the right choice. But the feeling didn't stay. It was replaced by a strange, almost buoyant sense of freedom. When the time came, I clicked the link to the live stream. I watched the screen flicker to life. Emily, standing beneath a leafy tree, her fiancé at her side, the city skyline faint in the distance. The ceremony was simple. No orchestra, no catered banquet, no grand displays. A handful of friends gathered, masked and smiling awkwardly at the camera. Emily's voice trembled as she read her vows, but I could see the stubborn tilt of her chin, so much like my own. I felt a swell of pride mingled with an ache that surprised me. For all our pain, she was still my daughter. I watched for a few minutes until the officiant declared them married, and the small group clapped politely. No one looked for me in the crowd. No one called my name or asked where I was. For a brief, selfish second, I wanted someone to say, "Margaret should be here." But the truth was, they were managing just fine without me. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair, letting the silence wrap around me like a blanket. I had not been invited. I had not forced myself to go where I was not wanted. And as the ceremony ended, I realized that I felt at peace. The days and weeks that followed were quieter than I'd anticipated, but the quiet was not as empty as I'd feared. In the space that had once been filled with worry about Emily, about Luke, about the next demand or disappointment, there was room for something new. I began to notice small pleasures I had long ignored, the way the sunflowers in my backyard turned their faces toward the light, the slow pleasure of a walk to the bakery in town, the gentle, undemanding company of my neighbor's cat, who had taken to visiting me every afternoon. For the first time in years, my life felt like my own. On Sundays, I sometimes joined Mrs. Harper and her sister Ruth for little excursions outside Hawthorne. We'd pile into Ruth's old Buick and drive to neighboring towns, searching for antique shops or farmers' markets. We became regulars at a tiny diner in Chesterfield, where the waitresses greeted us by name and always remembered that I liked my coffee black. We'd laugh over slices of pie, sharing stories of marriages and motherhood, of heartbreak and second chances. I told them things I had never said aloud, how much I missed David, how afraid I'd been to let go of my children, how lost I'd sometimes felt in the years since they'd grown up and left. They listened without judgment, their kindness as steady and unhurried as the flow of conversation around us. There were moments when the old ache returned, when I would glance at the family photos in the hallway and feel the sharp, familiar longing for what used to be. I wondered about Emily and her new husband, about whether she was happy, whether she resented me for not giving her the wedding she wanted. I wondered if Luke was struggling, if my choice had made things harder for him. The phone calls from both of them dwindled to a trickle. For weeks, there was nothing but silence. Then, one afternoon, Luke called. His voice was hesitant, softer than I remembered. "Hi, Mom," he said. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed you. I guess I didn't understand." His words tumbled out, awkward but sincere. He talked about how hard it had been to see the family fracture, about how he missed our old routines, about how he wished things had been different. I listened, letting him finish before I spoke. "Thank you, Luke," I said quietly. "I know this hasn't been easy for any of us, but I needed you both to see me. As your mother, yes, but also as a person. I hope one day you can forgive me for needing that." We talked for a long time, mostly about little things. The tomatoes he was growing on his balcony, a new recipe I'd tried, a book we both wanted to read. It was not a perfect reconciliation, but it was a beginning. When we hung up, I felt a softness in my heart, a sense of hope that had been missing for a long time. Emily did not call. Weeks passed before a card arrived in the mail, addressed in her careful looping script. Inside was a brief message. "I hope you're well. We're settling into the new apartment. Thank you for everything. Emily." There was no mention of the wedding, no apology, no request. I read the card twice, searching for hidden meaning, but it was just as it seemed, a small, polite acknowledgement. It hurt, but I did not let it undo me. For the first time, I was not the one reaching out, not the one trying to mend what had been broken. I let it be. As summer faded into autumn, I continued to build a life that belonged to me. I took up small hobbies, gardening, knitting, even painting, though my first attempts were laughably bad. I started volunteering at the local library, shelving books and reading stories to children, rediscovering the quiet joy of being useful without being needed. I spent long evenings on my porch, watching the leaves turn and fall, letting myself settle into the rhythm of a new, gentler season. Slowly, I began to see myself in a new way, not as a mother defined only by sacrifice, but as a woman with her own needs, her pleasures, her place in the world. I realized that my worth was not measured in dollars or pounds, not in the size of the wedding I could fund or the problems I could solve. My worth was something quieter, deeper, a steady presence, a generous spirit, a life lived with intention, even in the face of disappointment. My relationships with my children did not heal overnight. There were still awkward silences, still moments of doubt. Sometimes I worried that I had lost them for good. But more often, I felt a kind of peace in the distance between us, a recognition that love could survive even when we were not constantly reaching for one another. I learned to let go of the need to be indispensable, to be at the center of every family moment. I learned slowly and sometimes painfully that it was enough simply to be. In the quiet house on Willow Lane, I found a new kind of happiness. I filled my days with small routines, tending the marigolds, baking bread, listening to music late into the night. I opened my doors to friends, to neighbors, to the gentle possibility of new connections. I stopped measuring my value by what I could give and started asking what I wanted for myself. Sometimes, in the stillness of the evening, I would sit on the porch and watch the sky fade to blue, the world softening around me. I would think about David, about all the years we had built together, about the children we had raised, the choices I had made, the mistakes and triumphs and heartbreaks that had shaped me. I would think about the woman I had become, not perfect, but resilient, capable of both love and limits. I do not know what the future holds for me and my children. Perhaps one day Emily will call, and we will talk honestly about all that happened. Perhaps not. But for now, I am at peace with the uncertainty. I have learned that my life is my own, that I am enough, just as I am. And in my quiet house on Willow Lane, as the seasons turn and the world spins on, I am finally building a life that belongs to me.